Interbank markets cover the short-term borrowing and lending that commercial banks do with one another. How much do banks pay to borrow short-term? Interest rates are quoted in annual terms, but most interbank loans are made for periods less than 1 year. How much money must be paid to borrow short-term? Monetary policy has the most direct impact on interbank markets. We learn how short-term lending can be described in annual terms. In this brief segment, we examine the calculation of interest rates on short-term lending. After viewing this segment, you should be able to 1. Calculate required interest payments for short-term interbank lending using the annualized interbank rate.
Short-term interbank lending is an active segment of the money market. The most closely watched interbank interest rate is often the overnight rate. Many of the key interbank rates that are used for targeting monetary policy are also an overnight interest rate. This graph shows the quantity of loans of different maturities outstanding in Thailand's interbank market at the end of 2016. Commercial banks have relatively easy access to short-term funds from their depositors and also need to provide liquidity to their accounts holders. Thus, banks may be the most active day-to-day participants in the money market, both as borrowers and lenders. As a result, the market for lending between banks, the interbank market, is the core of the short-term lending market. We see that the largest category of lending is for overnight lending, which is more than 30 billion baht, larger than the lending levels at all other maturities less than 6 months. Let's develop some notation first. Start with the interest rate in its simplest form. Consider the interest on a loan that will be repaid in full in exactly 1 year. The lender transfers the principal, say $10 million, to the borrower at the beginning of the year. The borrower will repay the principal at the end of the year plus interest. The loan will cite an interest rate which is the premium over the initial principal repaid by the borrower, say 5%. The repayment will exceed the principal by 5%. For calculation purposes, we consider the interest rate in standard form. Define small I as the net interest rate, which is the annual percentage interest rate divided by 100. So if the lender quotes an interest rate of 5%, then I will be equal to 0.05. Mathematically, the final repayment after 1 year would be calculated as the initial principal multiplied by quantity 1 plus I. So if the initial principal is 10 million, the final payment would be 10.5 million. It is important to understand the precise meaning of the interest rate in money markets. Interest rates, even very short-run interest rates, are quoted in annual terms. There is a simple formula to calculate how much interest would be paid on a short-term loan given a specific annualized interest rate. The interest payable on a loan over a period less than 1 year is the quoted interest rate I multiplied by how long the loan lasts as a fraction of the year multiplied by the original principal. For the purposes of such calculations, every economy has its own day count convention governing the number of total days in the money market year. In some countries, number of days in the year is set as the actual number of days, usually 365. Other markets may use the round number of 360 to make calculation easier. Consider an example. A loan with a principal of 10 million and an annualized interest rate of 5% is to be repaid in 1 week. Assume a 365-day year. At the end of 7 days, the borrower repays 10 million times 5% divided by 100 multiplied by 7 over 365. This is almost $9,600.
After viewing this segment, you should be able to 1. Calculate required interest payments for short-term interbank lending using the annualized interbank rate. As we wrap up, let's conclude by summarizing the key question. How much do banks pay to borrow short-term? We've seen interest payments on short-term loans are proportional to the product of the annual interest rate times the principal. The factor of proportion is the fraction of the year that the money is lent.